how to sew the thinking cap pattern. Everyone on my newsletter got the pattern for free. So if you missed out on that, I have a link in my description to join my newsletter. I send like maybe one email a month and it's about a free pattern or some sort of discount to another product. And also if you did miss that, the pattern for this hat is on my website. I'll leave a link in the description. Let's get started. The pattern is super simple. It can be printed out on 8.5 by 11 or A4 paper. Just make sure to print it at 100% scale, and you can measure this box to be sure. So it should measure 2 inches or 5 centimeters. There's just 5 pages, got our cover page, and then the 4 different sizes. It's the same exact hat, sewn the same way, just scaled a little bit differently. I would say most people would fall into the size 2 or 3 category, and I did include the recommended head circumference for each size. But it's also important to note that different knit fabrics perform differently. So it's probably worth sewing a test beanie just to make sure it fits right, but obviously up to you. Like for example, I sewed this beanie in a size 3, and I used sort of a waffle knit material. My head's pretty big, but after it was complete, it was super loose on my head. I might have stretched it as I sewed, but after putting in the washer and dryer, it now fits perfectly. Moral of the story, you might want to sew test because knits act differently. Right now we can cut out our pattern pieces, just cutting to the edge of the black line. Once your pieces are cut out, choose the size you're going to use. We can start cutting out our fabric. I'm going to be using this cashmere sweater that I bought on eBay for I think about $5. People sell their cashmere sweaters on eBay with holes for very cheap, so highly recommend. But pretty much any knit fabric would work, and you really don't need much, probably about a quarter of a yard, quarter of a meter, because all you need is 4 of these pieces cut on the fold. So this is a pretty standard size piece of knit fabric. It's 60 inches wide, and I have it folded in half just at the top, and you can see I could easily fit 4 of these pieces. Also, any old sweater can get you at least 1 to 2 beanies. So like I said, you're going to need 4 of these pieces cut on the fold. And you also want the stretch of the fabric going this way, so it can stretch and form to your head. So I'm going to probably piece apart my sweater to get my 4 pieces cut on the fold, but if you have fabric, then just make sure the stretch is going this way. And since we're going to be cutting on the fold, you're going to want to press the fold of your fabric. Just be careful to not burn your fabric if you're using wool, so do it on a low setting. Now you can cut your pieces out, lining up the side that says cut on fold to the fold of your fabric, and just cutting right to the edge of your pattern piece. And another important step, once you cut a piece out, we're just going to cut off the very corner of the folded side on both sides. So literally just about 1/8 of an inch or about 2 millimeters. So your piece should look something like this when unfolded, and having these little notches on these sides is really helpful for lining everything up. All right, so you should have 4 pieces now cut on the fold, and then we have little notches where the fold was on all of the pieces on both sides. Now we can start attaching our pieces together. All you're gonna do is take one piece and put it right sides together with another, and then do that to the other 2. So grab some clips or pins, and we're just going to be attaching one side first of both of these doubled up panels. And the points to line up is this top little point, the side notch, and then the bottom little point. So I've lined up that middle notch and then the points on the top and bottom, and then put a few pins or clips in between. Do this to both sides, and then we can start sewing. Once you are pinned or clipped up, we can sew our sides at 1/4 inch, starting at the tip all the way to the other tip. Starting at the tip, make sure to back stitch and then just stitch at 1/4 inch along the entire side, finishing with a back stitch at the bottom. Make sure to sew slow and not stretch your fabric as you go along, because knit fabrics can sometimes be tricky. And my stitch length is at 2.5. I like this for knits. Should look something like this. Do this to both sides. Boom. And if you have a little bit of waviness, you can press that out with your iron. We can now attach our 2 main panels together. All we're going to do to attach these together is I'm gonna flip them open and place the right sides together. We'll line up the notches in the middle and then the pointed top and bottom. But first, I'm actually gonna bring these back to the ironing board and show you an option. So since these are supposed to be pretty fitted to your head, there's ways we can minimize the seam bulk. So when you're wearing it, you don't see the seam as much poking out. So I'll just show you 2 quick methods for minimizing that seam bulk. The first one would be, we're just going to press the entire seam one way on one of the panels, and then we'll press it the other way on the other panel. So that just involves kind of putting it over the end of your ironing board and just pressing the seam to one way on one and then the other way on the other. And then the other option is to actually press the seam open. I like to say butterfly. So you'll butterfly that seam all the way down on both of the sides. You can also totally skip this step like I did on this hat. But for this fabric I'm using, I'm going to go with the butterfly open option. So I'll just press the seam open all the way on both of my panels using the end of the ironing board to my advantage. So I butterflied my seams, but obviously up to you. You could also top stitch them to one side, but it's definitely worth experimenting, playing around. Now we are going to connect our two main panels together. I'm just gonna take one, flip it open, grab the other one, flip it open as well, and we're just gonna put good sides together. And the points we're gonna line up is this side little notch, and then the point or the seam at the top and the bottom. And we're going to line up the seam line, so where the fabric meets on both of the pieces at the bottom, and we'll place clips or pins all the way around. I like to start by lining up these 4 points. So the top or bottom, then the side notches, and then we'll put clips or pins in between all the way around. Should look something like this. And now just place pins or clips in between all the way around. All right, should look something like this. And now before we sew this entire thing up, we're gonna do one crucial step. So you wanna decide which side you want on the inside of the hat. So if it's all the same fabric, it doesn't really matter. And we're just going to mark a 2-inch or 5-centimeter gap on where the seam will be. And this gap is where we will flip through the fabric to get a super clean finish. Doesn't have to be exactly 2 inches, but just enough of a gap to pull it through. And you want the gap to be marked towards the seam we've already sewed. So this will be at the top of the hat on the inside and you won't see it. So we're gonna start at the beginning of our gap that we marked. We'll do a little back stitch, stitch all the way around this perimeter at a 1/4 inch, and then finish at the other side of our gap with a back stitch. Just stitching at a 1/4 inch all the way around, going nice and slow, making sure not to push or pull or stretch the fabric. Should look something like this. So we've stitched around the entire perimeter except for our little gap. Now before I flip it through my hole, since I butterflied this seam, I'm just going to butterfly the other seam really quick, but obviously up to you and what finish you're doing. So I just went around and roughly butterflied the seam open for a little less bulk. Now you're going to want to locate your opening, and we're just going to flip the entire piece to the other side through this little hole. No need to force it, should come through relatively easily. And once you flip it all the way through, you should be left with this kind of clean looking, almost pill shape. So something like this. And now before we flip the inside into the outside, we're just going to close up our little opening. So I've just brought it over to my machine, and I'm just going to stitch roughly at a 1/4 inch or less a few times back and forth just to really close this up. You could also do a zigzag or whatever finish you'd like. This will be on the inside of the hat so you won't see it. Should look something like this. So our gap is now closed. And now you can take the side that had the opening and just kind of put it into the other side with this 4-way cross seam. You can put your finger there and just bring that up to the other 4-way cross seam, and you can kind of start to see your hat take shape. Boom! As a final little finishing step, I'm just going to take it to my ironing board and press this fold all the way around. Make sure it's nice and crisp. So I'll just place it over the end of my ironing board and press this bottom edge nice and flat. Let's go, squad. I love how the 4-panel design looks. You can also press these curved edges to get them laying nice and flat. And for one final optional step, because sometimes if you do plan on washing this in the washing machine, it can separate into this pill shape again. I'm just gonna take a hand sewing needle with my thread doubled up and then a small knot tied at the bottom. Then I'll just make sure my hat is nicely seated how I like it. And I'll come from the inside, pull my needle from the little intersection of seams here through to the right side. Boom, just like that. Make sure everything looks nice. And I'll just pull it back right through the seam again to the underside. And then I'll just tie it off to that little tail with a double knot. So now your beanie is permanently in this shape because we tied the bottom side to the top. So if you wash it, it won't turn into that pill shape again. You might need to press this bottom edge if you do wash it, but that's it. Let's freaking go, squad. Simple, swag, warm. Make sure to drop down any questions down below. Peace and love.